We continue now with a look at China, one of the most lucrative markets for global companies anywhere. It has 1.4 billion people and a growing middle class. 440 million Chinese have lifted themselves from poverty over the past 30 years. But skeptics still pose questions about the stability of China's economy. An aging population, rapid urbanization, and rising labor costs threaten its competitive edge. State capitalism, rule of law, and cybersecurity are also challenges for companies doing business there. Join me now, four distinguished guests. David Novak is CEO of Yum Brands. Its Pizza Hut and KFC brands have thrived in China. John Mack is the former CEO of Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley was one of the first global investment banks to establish a presence in China. Zhang Shen is the CEO of SOHO China. It is one of the country's largest real estate developers. Ian Bremmer is the president of Eurasia Group, a leading global political risk and consulting firm. I am pleased to have all of them here to talk about China, its economy, the political currents that are there. And I begin with you. Tell me how you think the Chinese economy looks over the next several years, and what are the challenges for it?
I think 2011 we had one of the most challenging years in the 17 years I've been doing as a developer. I have never seen credit so tight. Banks are not lending because, you know, China was fighting against inflation. So the way to do it is to tighten the credit. As a developer, of course, even worse is for residential developers, you cannot sell homes. For those who have already owned one home, you simply cannot buy a second home, no matter what's your need. So that was how the Chinese government was so strict in controlling the inflation. But by the end of last year, the inflation is pretty much under control. I think this year, we're looking ahead. I will be surprised if the credit is not going to be eased, because Chinese government needs to target, they have a target of 7.5% GDP. To reach that, when the European market seems to be down, export is down, they have to somehow boost the domestic consumption and growth.
Change their economic model.
Change the model a bit.
Exporting economy to a domestic demand economy. Those numbers for the 7.2 or 7.4%, many people consider conservative. They think they might still maintain an 8-point plus GDP growth rate.
That I don't know. I mean, I do know one thing is that whether it's 7.5 or 8.2, they need to relax the credit. When there's no money in the system, companies cannot borrow, small companies cannot borrow, they cannot develop. So money has to be in the system in order for the economy to continue to grow.
John?
Well, I think she's right on target. I do think the government has opened up on reserves. They've reduced the reserve requirements some of the banks, all the banks, which will put money into the system. I was just there 3 weeks ago, and I came back very optimistic. I mean, as I talked to government officials, the central bank, some of the leaders in business, even though there are challenges, and without question there's been a clamp on real estate. This idea of having two homes and speculating has really been discouraged, to say the least.
Was it because they were fearful of a property bubble?
Yeah, I think, look, we got in trouble in the real estate market in this country. I think they've seen people trying to reach too far and borrow too much money. So I think it was a conservative thing to do, and I think they did the right thing. Do I think they will keep it on forever? No. But they're really paying attention to some of the issues they have. Inflation's a big issue. They're worried about it. Speculation is a big issue, and they're worried about it. And job creation is a bigger issue, and they're very worried about it. And to do that, you have to manage the economy, I think, the way they've done it. I give them very high marks. They're not always right, but they can change their mind, and they do it very quickly. And I think at the end of the day, as they reach out to bring more business into China and to export more business, not products, business. I think the Chinese would like very much to have a much better relationship in the business community in the United States and actually have some of their manufacturing capability in the United States and be more of a global player in the United States. So I'm really optimistic. Charlie, I came back, and you may tell me I'm wrong, I came back and started buying A shares. Now, I can't do that directly as a U.S. citizen, but through a QFI, Qualified Investment Account, I can invest in China in these smaller companies. And I believe that's where the real growth is.
David, the story of Yum Brands is just a remarkable story there. What did you know that other people didn't know? What did you do to get this sort of grounding there that's been so successful for you?
Well, we've been in China for 25 years, and we've taken a very patient approach to it. I think the biggest strength we've had in China is a local management team that really understood the Chinese culture, how to do business there. You know, I think most international business, when you have expats at the helm, you really don't do that well. But we've had a great Chinese leader there, Sam Su, who's built a phenomenal team, and we've really localized our brands quite well. So if you go into KFC for breakfast, we'll have a congee, a soybean milk, fried dough. We have a very diverse menu, multiple proteins. We're open 24/7. If you go into Pizza Hut, we change out our menu every 6 months, 25% of our menu. But we have a very localized menu, and we're very relevant to the Chinese customer because I think we have people that understand how to really make it happen there. And that's been the big key.
You do a lot of marketing?
Yes, we do a lot of marketing, but I think our biggest strength, frankly, is our operations capability. 90% of our restaurant general managers have at least a college education. We have 50% of our team members are university students. And the passion that these kids have for business and learning is just absolutely unparalleled anywhere I go in the world. And I think when you have that operational excellence as your bedrock, you're able to grow very rapidly. You know, we opened up 656 restaurants last year. We hope to do at least 600 this year.
It is your growth market.
It is, absolutely. I can go on and on for it.
All right, but there's this question, and many people have talked about this, and John's been part of these sort of, when Chinese businessmen come here and they hear this from Americans all the time. Hey, it's not a level playing field. That's one of the things they hear. And from Chinese businesses, you hear it's not fair in the competition between private and state companies.
Yeah, well, I think it's been clearly, I think we've had a level playing field.
You do.
I think one of the great things that that everybody's concerned about in China, government wants, is they want jobs. And one of the things that we're creating with all the restaurants that we're opening up is we're creating about 40,000, 50,000 jobs a year. So we also don't have any intellectual properties to speak of other than the Colonel's 11 herbs and spices. So we're not in a segment of the business that is of high concern with the government. So frankly, our brands are beacons of success in tier 4, 5, and 6 cities. And so when we go into these new cities, we're almost saying the cities arrive.
But is it the growth outside of Beijing and Shanghai and these other cities that we don't know as well, where they have, Chongqing is what, 30 million? I mean, it's a huge population there.
20 million.
20 million. Yeah.
There's going to be huge growth that, and the government's also developing 20 new clusters of cities that will be coming in the next 10 years. So, just the expansion, the opportunity to go into these new cities that are a million plus also what's going on with railway stations. And I went into Suzhou, for example. We had a KFC downstairs, not visible, doing about $40,000 US a week. Then you go upstairs in the high traffic area. We're delivering food up there with a concept called KFC Select, and we're doing 60,000. So where we have one restaurant manager, 100 employees, we've got about a $5.2 million business right there in that one train station.
So when you look at state capitalism, can it maintain the advantages that it has had in this economic system?
Well, the answer historically for any country is no, because it takes advantage of cheap stuff that they run out of. It's an inefficient system. Argentina, state capitalist system, cheap land, ran out of cheap land, country fell apart. Venezuela, cheap oil, run out of cheap oil, falls apart. China, cheap labor. Now, the great thing about China is that the government officials in China know very well that they need to fundamentally transform their economic system in order to continue to succeed over time. That's great. They've diagnosed the problem. That doesn't mean that they can necessarily actually implement. And when I think about China, for 34 years now, they've had on average 10% plus state-directed growth. They've got a big car with a very, very powerful engine. They're going really fast down a straight road. And the problem is that coming up on the road, there's a big curve. But we've never seen steering from China, right? And we don't know if they're going to be successful. I mean, look, I happen to think that Yum Brands, I'm not shilling for these guys. I think they've done one of the most fantastic jobs of any U.S. firm in terms of building a U.S. brand across China for many of the reasons that David mentioned. But I also think that they've taken a massive bet, a massive long-term bet on a country that has by far greater volatility in its outcomes over the next 5, 10, 15 years than any other major economy in the world. And that's a point that we have to get our arms around.
Do you agree?
I think I would agree to a certain degree, not all. But I think if you look at China for the last 30 years, all the way until 2009, it was pretty clear developing its market economy. From the state-owned, from the planning economy, moving towards a market economy, very steady. But what happened is in 2009, when the financial crisis happened, when China suddenly realized the government needed to have a quick stimulus package, they went down to the path of channeling all that money, 10 trillion yuan really, to state-owned company. This fundamentally changed. So from 2009 to now, state-owned companies become so much more powerful. What do you call government? State capitalism becomes so much more powerful, and private sector has been really suppressed. So that has actually given people confused people. You know, people begin to think, are we going ahead with market development, or are we going back?
Talk to me about the people that you know well and how they see China's future. I mean, the people that you brought here to this program that we spoke about it.
Well, look, again, some of those individuals are with some of the government-owned companies. Some are not. But by and large, to a person, they're very positive. Now, you can say they're drinking the Kool-Aid, but I think they're a lot smarter than just drinking the Kool-Aid. What they're trying to understand is, and again, it gets to what David said earlier, a level playing field. They want a chance to develop businesses here in the U.S. One of the large companies said to me, I actually tried to make an offer for one of your companies, and I didn't get anyone to respond. Chairman Fu, when he was at CNOC, talked about Uniola, California, and how he had the highest bid, but he didn't buy the company. Chevron bought it a year later at a lower price. I think they're optimistic. I think they believe, and I believe this, Charlie, I have a lot of faith in the leadership of that country. Are there outliers from time to time? The answer is yes. But they really do their homework. They try to understand what they need to do to change. If it's creating jobs, if it's making sure inflation doesn't take off, and eventually, as Yum Brands have done, other companies are going to figure it out to do business in China. What Yum Brands has done, and David hit the point, I got a local manager, a local leader. I think too many non-Chinese companies come in and they bring the guy out of the, the right school, but he didn't come out of China. He came out of somewhere in the U.S. or Europe. So I think American companies and other companies going into China have to figure out, they have to be local. Now, that is not your question. Your question is, how do they feel, the leadership that I talked to?
Are they worried about any kind of political change, or are they worried about the sustainability of the kind of growth that they've had?
They're worried about creating jobs. That's what they're worried about.
Or losing jobs.
Or losing jobs. And they talk about it. They talk about wages in China are going up. The competitive edge that they've had is not where it was 10 years ago.
That's the point that you were
So they're worried about it. I mean, someone was telling me the other day in textiles, the textiles now are really moving to Bangladesh and other countries where it's even cheaper. They are worried about it. But again, worry about it means they're spending serious time trying to figure out what to do. They do not have their head in the sand at all.
And the main thing they want the prosperity to increase is because more and more people enter and they want apartments, and they want offices, and all of that.
The consumer economy is really starting to take off, as you mentioned earlier. Whether you look at the estimates, you've got 300 million people in the consuming class going to 600 million people. Wages are going up, but the consuming power is going up. I think you've got an export economy that's also internally driven a lot by all the construction and the infrastructure that we were talking about. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think the Chinese government and the people that we have working in China have nothing but respect for the Chinese government. They think they'll figure it out. And I think that you've got that going for them. They also have a tremendous advantage of speed. Just look how the inflation was handled. They knew it was an issue. They got on top of it, and there's a tremendous advantage on speed to market.
Is corruption a problem?
I think corruption is a problem in some places of the government, but everybody's aware of these things. It's like everybody has their eyes open, and I think that China is evolving, and it's going to evolve at its own pace, and it's going to be successful.
The notion that Chinese people have nothing but respect for the Chinese government, I think, overstates the case very dramatically. I think that clearly the Chinese people are very proud of what their nation and their government has accomplished economically over the years. They also are very aware of the entrenched corruption throughout the top levels. Yes, there are engineers that are running the Chinese government. There are also billionaires that are running the Chinese government. The fact that those two things are
princelings that are running the Chinese government.
Those things are not lost on the average Chinese people. And one of the things the Chinese government did very well historically is they were very insulated from the Chinese people. If they wanted to do a 5 or 10-year plan, if they wanted to build a road and move a village, they could do that. Increasingly, they actually have real constituents that are capturing them that they have to listen to, and that is limiting their
flexibility. Who are these constituents?
Their constituents are all over the place. There can be people that are demanding better air quality. There can be people that are saying we want our companies to do X, Y, and Z. Some of those are very positive things. The point is the Chinese government itself increasingly has much less flexibility in its policy options. And when that occurs, their ability to choose how they want to work with the United States and American corporations as opposed to with Chinese firms also gets more constrained. Life is getting harder for the Chinese government. Making the right decisions is getting harder for the Chinese government. And as a consequence, even though they want to have good relations with American companies, they want to have good relations with the United States. But you know, Xi Jinping, a week before he came to the U.S., they vetoed the Security Council resolution on Syria. I hate to say it, but America, we're not their demographic. American multinationals increasingly aren't their demographic either. And that's going to cause a lot of challenge, not just for U.S.-China at the high level, but also for folks on the ground that are doing business in China.
Why did they veto the Syrian resolution?
My understanding was that Dai Bingguo, the top foreign policy official in China, actually was in favor of abstaining, and then Putin actually made an impassioned poem called the Hu Jintao, and he said, okay, I'll vote against. The Russians have a strong view on this. But the point is, the notion that they would veto a week before they came to the United States to meet Barack Obama with the future president of China a few years ago, before 2008, that would have been unheard of. But now there are more constraints. And we're seeing this across the board. A Chinese government that isn't democratic but has to increasingly focus within a much narrower decision set. And making the kind of major political and economic transformations that need to occur. Yes, they're aware, they're smart, they want to do the right thing, but they're more constrained. We've got smart officials in the United States, but they're very constrained. They're very gridlocked.
It's evolution, don't you think?
Yeah.
Exactly. I think it's evolution under tougher circumstances.
I think it's a tougher circumstance, but it is an evolution. And the point that I'm making about the highest government officials is that they're respected for their IQ points. That's one thing that I really do believe.
Their IQ points?
Yeah, and being very smart and very thoughtful and very aware of what's going on.
I'm sensing disagreement from our friend from China.
I agree with Ian that I think the Chinese government's job is becoming more and more difficult. That the options are, less and less, because there are just so many different fractions, and they all become quite vocal in what they want. And I think before the time of Twitter, social media, Weibo, most of the people's voice don't have a place to be voiced. And today, any incident, anything happening in China, immediately, in a second, it goes on Weibo. And it creates such public awareness. And I think the Chinese government, despite being not democratically elected, also wants to be populist.
But go ahead, John.
Well, you can't disagree with what Ian said. I mean, you've got a country 20 years ago, you would go there, they were burning little coal things to keep warm in the wintertime, and now they have, electricity and natural gas, and they still have a pollution problem, but they're working on it. I mean,
and they're investing more in alternative sources of energy than we are.
The country came from an undeveloped country where you had a billion point 3 people, and they've made a lot of changes. It has to be more complicated now. It's a different dynamic, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or whatever it may be. But you've got to look where they came from, where are they now, And the point I'm trying to make is they understand they have a more difficult issue. Why is it, are they reaching out to people like David or myself and others, come to China, meet with our CEOs, talk to us about what you see, talk to us about the financial crisis. If you could do it over, what would you do differently? Now, you take all of that on the economic side, and then you take the social issues. I think the concern also are the social issues. They're huge. I mean, when I
mean
go
the social tension in the
social
fabric of the
tensions,
country.
exactly. When I talk to young people in China and I ask them, what's on your mind? He said, John, I can take you to areas of this country that you would be shocked with the pollution, how people are treated. So, you know, the government officials, again, I think they hear this. Will they change as quickly as they might change in other countries?
Well, they also know about it. Everybody in China knows about it because of social media today.
Exactly.
We're all aware of the kind of fear of instability that pervades that place, and especially the leadership. Right. I mean, Hu Jintao worries most of all, as you know, Ian, most of all about the Communist Party losing control. That is the rampant fear that they have. Right?
Stability.
Stability. Yes?
Yes, no question about it.
Yeah.
The change has been so dramatic, to your point earlier, though. If you think about how they've managed through this change, I mean, when you go through massive change in a company or a country or whatever, there's never a black and white. You're going to have to move your way there. I think the way how they're navigating through this by seeking the know-how. I view them, they're one of their biggest strengths culturally is that they're a know-how building country. Mm. And they do put the smart people in the room, and they do look for the solution. Now, we may not agree with all of them. They got a lot of challenges, but I'm very impressed with
But my impression also is they'd be ruthless in the solution. If they made a decision that that was the way to go, and for the best interest of China, they'd be ruthless in implementing that decision.
And they'll go with it, and they'll have speed, and they'll get something done.
Is India, over the long run, a better model for the future?
Well, you know, I think India's democratic. I think that's a big plus. With that comes a lot more bureaucracy, a lot more chaos than you have in China.
You know, in 1993, 1992, I went to China for the first time, and I was so blown away by it. And immediately, Morgan Stanley started investing in the region. A year later, or 2 years later, I went to India. And I said to myself, thank God I came to China first. Because if I had gone to India, I would have seen English as a language, rule of law, and more democracy than I've ever seen anywhere else. Right. Now, in the last 20 years, if you look at the two countries, who's really made the move? The move's been China. Right. So when I look at India, they're making progress at a snail's pace. What China has done, and broadly, and I know there's a lot of challenges, a lot of problems, and there's a whole focus on raising the standard of living for the people, versus India. It's unbelievable, Charlie.
But do you believe India, over the long run, will be in a better place?
I'm optimistic.
And once they get an infrastructure, and
yes.
Most people I know believe that, John.
Absolutely.
Over the long run,
I was just there. You can tell they're making progress, but it's snail's pace.
I mean, here's the question: is that you look at China right now, and there's no question, China this year, China next year, China the year after that, infrastructure-wise, size of market, it's very exciting. Your Facebook, you got 500 million people on the internet right now in China. You can't touch them. Right. You can go into India. China's trying to develop their own 4G system, their own 4G standard for telecommunications. India works with the rest of the world. This is the challenge. And then longer term, you have the point that even though India is democratic and corrupt and slow and burdensome, they can actually keep doing what they've been doing, and the place won't fall apart. China actually has to actively restructure their economy and probably much of their political system. If they create a banking system, they have to do things that a country of 1.3 billion people has never done before in the history of the world. And we're hoping they can do it. I think all of us hope they can do it.
We're pulling for them.
But how much do you want to bet on that is an open question.
Well, it looks like the political reform is on the way. I mean, look at Wang Yang, who is about to be, he's the incoming Politburo, standing Politburo member. Hasn't been, it's widely predicted.
He's now in charge of in the
Guangdong province. Right. And he had overseen this Wukan village election, right? I don't know if you noticed that in the small village Wukan, where they were trying to first went against the government because their land has been taken away. They first started with the social unrest, and the government could have harshly crack it down. They didn't. Instead, they went in, managed by Wang Yang, to initiated a democracy, essentially, a village election. So that was very much seen as a positive management in a smaller and a very grassroots level, a democracy. And even Wen Jiabao now are talking about democracy can happen and should happen at the village level, at the county level. So it seems like the political reform is on the way.
You agree with that?
I think that there are some incremental moves that are positive. I really do. But the question will be, as it gets more difficult, as the economic environment gets more difficult, as leaders get pressed, as they experience their own Tiananmen moments again, as of course they will at some point, how do they respond? That's when you really test the mettle. It's not when things are going really well. It's when things are going badly that you wonder where people's values really are. And at that point, will a country that runs by consensus, without strong individual leaders, but a bunch of folks that have to come together, will they be willing to really strip power and money away from state-owned enterprises that have enriched these folks for so long?
I disagree with you on that. I think that the Tiananmen incident happened precisely because you have one very strong man. And now that you don't have one strong man, you have a consensus group.
This would be Deng Xiaoping? Or?
This would be Deng Xiaoping back in '89, right? And now you have a consensus group. When there's a social unrest, it's unlikely to be going so harshly, and that's what we have just seen at Wuhan in Guangdong. So, you know, that's what we're looking at. The consensus building is actually a better way of dealing with all the potential problems, because it forces the government to change. Rather than going, bang, let's just fight and force it. That was what happened in '89.
What about the currency, John? I mean, the idea of relaxing and letting their currency appreciate.
Well, what they said when they were here not long ago in Washington to Secretary Clinton made the point, currency's appreciated a little over 26% in the last 4 years. What Secretary Clinton said, yes, that's not enough. They get it. I think it will appreciate more. They're very focused on it. But again, their focus has to be on job creation. And they've got to take care of their country first, or they won't get the chance if they do not take care of their country first. But they get it. They're very smart.
So they focus on job creation by making sure that the growth rate remains around 8%.
Yeah, or 7.5%, and keep the currency as low as they can. The currency's going up. There's no question.
There's no question. They never
going up.
It has to do that.
Yeah.
And it will be, as Christine Lagarde said, over the next 20, 25 years, one of the 3 reserve currencies in the world, along with the euro and the dollar. Yes?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It will.
Some people speculate that the Chinese economy is already larger than the American economy. Have you ever read those stories that appear occasionally?
Sure. There were a couple of stories in the last year that basically said they'd outstripped it. Look, I think the real point is not whose economy is actually largest. I think the real question is who's the wealthier country. This is why you have to worry so much if you're the Chinese government about employment, because if you can't keep those employment numbers, you're suddenly vastly concerned about social instability. United States, I'm not proud about the fact that we have the kind of total unemployment, 15% total unemployment in this country right now, but it's not as if people are going to storm the White House, or it's not, you can have a downgrade in the U.S. and people still go to work the way they did before, or they still live the way they did before. We're going to be in an environment, sooner or later, whatever the year is, China will be the world's largest economy. It will be a poor country. I don't think we appreciate how much of a change that will reflect in the world order.
Very true.
What change will it reflect in the world order?
Because their priorities will have to be overwhelmingly domestic. That's not true of the United States. We can do foreign policy badly or well, and we've done both, Lord knows, over the decades. We can focus on building international institutions. We can focus on global governance and public goods. China will not do that. From their perspective, they should not do that. That's a vastly different way of thinking about the global economy, global politics, and all the rest. One of the biggest problems will be, of course, that a lot of other countries in the world looking at the United States creating a global order, so that order works for me. A lot of countries outside of China looking at what China will be doing, focused on China's world economy, will not work for them. Yeah. And that creates opportunities for the U.S., but it's a problem for the global economy.
So the global economy today, has it stabilized? Are you optimistic that we've turned the corner that sort of the 2008 brought around?
Well, look, we've made a lot of progress. I'm optimistic. I think, again, we have serious issues still in Europe, even though there's been some settlement with the Greek government, but it's just a matter of time. They're going to have to come back for more. Then the question is what happens in Portugal, what happens in Spain.
So there was a firewall created.
Well, it depends. If they need a lot more funding, and the ECB, which it's not a united country, but they call it a united bank system, there are going to be big issues, and so that's a worry. It hasn't gone away. It'll be bouncing around. I think they've done a great job so far. I think the U.S. is doing better, and I agree. I think the real unemployment rate is probably 14–15%, because many people, as you know, are no longer applying for unemployment.
Right.
But by and large, given where we were in 2008, the world's in a much better place now. What does that mean with oil at $110 a barrel? What does it mean is going to happen in the Middle East with Syria and maybe Iran? You put all that in, there's a lot of risk in the world.
My thanks to Ian Bremmer, Zhang Shen, David Novak, and John Mack. A couple of things for your reading list. This is Newsweek, the rise of China's billionaire tiger women, of which Zhang Shen is one of the people profiled. Bloomberg Businessweek, and the issue out now has, hey, China, stop stealing our stuff. David Novak has a book called Taking People With You, and Ian Bremmer has a new book called Every Nation for Itself, Winners and Losers in a G0 World, China and its Future. Back in a moment.